Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Journey on the Podcast. I'm Ben Sanguinetti, and this is my good friend Nate Jones. And with us today, we have a very special guest. This is Mark Tanaka. He is a teacher, a healer, and he teaches yoga, qigong, meditation with an emphasis on working with the energy body. That is awesome. And does one-on-one coaching and healing work with people focusing on repairing attached trauma in the body. Wow, that's awesome. I did not read that all the way before, and that is very, very, very unique and cool. I'm really excited to be talking with you today, Mark, and we're going to jump into it right away. Nate, let's go ahead and lead us into a meditation because I am very excited to get into this episode.
Okay, thanks, Ben. Thanks for being here, Mark. Awesome to see you and hear your voice. Okay, so if you want to, go ahead and close the eyes. And if you're doing something that requires your vision, or if you just like to keep the eyes open, then just do that. And just take some of your attention, or as much of your attention as you can, to your breath. And just simply, take some deep breaths if you want to. Right? Take some easy breaths if you want. Or just notice how your breath is right now. And just kind of feeling the energy of the inhale and the energy of the exhale. And just the gentleness of each. At the inhale, a little bit of an opening. And the exhale, the quality of settling, right, kind of coming back in. And see if you can allow the breath just to kind of caress your body, to kind of caress the inner body. And sometimes I think about, if you could imagine what it would be like if you're rocking a baby. And just, that gentle, with that much care. Just allowing the breath to touch your body in that way. And with each exhale, right, just kind of setting yourself down into the place that you're at. A little bit more, just settling and relaxing. And, even if you could imagine if you were setting a baby down in a crib, how gentle, right, with so much care you would put the baby down. And the exhale could have that same quality, right, with your own body. Right, and then just 2 more breaths, right, just breathing and feeling. All right, great. And then if you want to, go ahead and take one nice big breath in. All right, really feel the uplifting sense of the inhale. And then open the mouth and just let the breath fall out of your mouth. All right, and then whenever you're ready, if you want to, let the eyes start to open. All right, cool. So welcome back, everyone. I like to say welcome back because there's always like a little bit of a shift usually, before and after that. So it's like we're welcoming in kind of like a little different version of ourselves possibly. And I'm really excited to have Mark here too, because Mark, all of our guests are really special. so like, they're really special in their own way, and we all have like, different relationships. And my relationship with Mark, especially this year, I think became a lot more intimate in the way that, like, I was really going to him to seek like to, to seek some help, like some really deep internal help, because, like, in the pandemic we've all, gone through our own challenges, and we're just like, overwhelmed at times. We don't know how to deal with stuff. And so, for me, Mark is someone who I can completely trust, and who I can tell really, anything to, and knowing that I won't be judged for it, and that I won't be pushed, to do, anything in a certain way. I'll be listened to, and that I'll definitely get, like, some advice, or some guidance, or some, like, a different perspective that will just, like, to really really change, the way that I'm looking at things or feeling about myself or somebody else. So yeah, I'm really excited to get into this too, and I just want to say thanks again for being here, Mark. It's really really nice.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
And yeah, I was really excited today to meet Mark. I was going through his bio and I just said to myself, wow, this is a really special person that I've never even heard. When it comes to, I'm really novice when it comes to yoga and qigong. I've implemented a little bit of a qigong routine this year, which has been helpful, but I definitely have more work to do. And as I'm reading this along, I'm just saying to myself, wow, this is really different from anything that I've heard from a yoga teacher or a qigong teacher. So, with that being said, Mark, obviously that took some time to develop to where you're at today. And I would love to hear the whole story of how you started, where you grew up, how you grew up, and what brought you to, being on this podcast today, basically.
Got it. All right. You want the long version?
Yeah, just give whatever you think's important.
Oh man.
And don't be afraid.
Okay.
Don't be afraid to go deep. Don't be afraid to go deep at all.
Okay. Because it's kind of, yeah, it is a long story. It's been, a long time in the making. So I grew up in San Francisco. My parents are Japanese both. What else? So the interesting thing is that I grew up in San Francisco in the US, but I was going to Japanese school for like 8 years. So I actually grew up reading, writing, listening to Japanese, and watching shows and reading Japanese books primarily, actually. So even though I was growing up in the U.S., I was cultured mostly as a Japanese kid. And I went to Japanese school, which in San Francisco, there was a school that was specifically set up for the children of business men that were coming here to set up the branches of Japanese companies. So these schools were kind of hardcore. Every Saturday it was from 9 a.m. to like 4 p.m. And we would do math, science, social studies, and Japanese language, just like you would in a Japanese school. So I did that for like 8 years. I actually had culture shock in a way when I went to high school, because around middle school, a lot of my friends went back to Japan because their parents and fathers that were here for business terms were ending their business terms here. And so I lost a majority of my Japanese friends. Then I went to high school. And then even though I've been in the US the whole time, I had a big culture shock because all my friends were now American in a way. And I was having issues, like, for example, with jokes, like Japanese jokes and American culture, like jokes were so different, and I couldn't connect on the level of humor at all. And there were so many things I wanted to communicate to my friends that I could do it in Japanese, but I couldn't figure out how to say it in English and things like that. So that was a really strange experience to have, growing up in the U.S. in San Francisco and in high school, having to adapt. And then my parents were kind of strange. They were not typical Asian parents. There's a lot of, I think, stereotypes and tropes with Asian families and Asian parents and things like that. But they were not typical in a sense that, well, first of all, my dad was a owner of a bar, and my mom was a musician. So I came from a very not so hardcore, academically oriented, high pressure Asian family situation. And my dad passed away when I was 10, which was significant. Definitely impacted me. A bunch of different traumas came from all that too. And my mom was a really sweet, wonderful, loving person. And she has some issues too. So that created some challenges, between us and me. And that was very formative, I think. My dynamic with my mother was a challenging one that in its own way created its traumas that kind of set me up for getting into the things I got into, and also the death of my father too. Um, and so when I was finishing off high school, going to college, a couple things. On one level, I was doing great. I played sports. I cheated my way through high school mostly because I didn't really care much for academics, but I had enough, intelligence where it wasn't so much of an issue. I could wing it too. So it was a combination of cheating and winging it that got me all B's, and I got into the UC system. Back then, it was way easier to get in. So I was like, oh, and most of my friends were Asian middle class kids. So, you go to college, right? It's like, that's just what you do. And everyone was applying. So I was like, all right, I'm just going to apply. That sounds fun. Getting away from home, going somewhere. It's like summer camp, And so I got into most of the UCs except for Berkeley in LA. And decided to go to the UC Santa Cruz because most of my buddies were going there. I considered San Diego, but it was a little too far from home, and none of my friends were going there. So I was like, not really a thing to do. I had to check out Davis, but it looked like flat and hot. So I was like, I'm cool. And then I went to Santa Cruz during the summer transition between high school and college. A buddy of mine came back from summer camp with these spiritual books. And I started reading these books and I ate it up because it was this interesting mixture. Because I grew up with anime and manga, which had a lot of elements of spirituality and Eastern culture and Eastern spirituality built into, so I was very much hip to that stuff. But it was interesting to see these books that were sort of the Western interpretation of these principles and concepts framed in a story form that made it very more accessible, more real in a way, and started to open up this possibility that there is a side to life that I hadn't considered or reflected on or looked at, and up to that point I was already a very contemplative person. I was very internal. I thought about shit very deeply, and so having these books kind of open up these new avenues of thought was really inspiring. And when I got into college, I kept on going with some of these readings, and after that point, I really never read English books, except for what I had to do in school, which I kind of skimmed through and got the Cliff Notes and stuff like that. So, but these books I actually devoured really quickly. They were the first books I read in English that were actually interesting and engaging. And also around that time, all these synchronicities started to happen where someone will tell me about a book, and then next week someone else will tell me about the same book, and the third week someone else will tell me about the same book. And I started getting these weird spiritual messages type of thing that started happening. Right, this really serendipitous stuff, and that just kept happening. And so that process, it felt like these books were being brought to me, and people were being kind of brought to me. This weird stuff was going on, and the books will also be talking about that, right? To pay attention to these synchronicities. And one of these books from a long time ago, called Celestine Prophecy, was really about that, about following the energy, following inspiration and synchronicity. And right around the time I read that book, that shit was going on in my life. So it was a trip. I was reading about this stuff and it was happening to me. And so then I got into college and UCSC. So I started smoking herb, a lot of it. And I started, also taking psychedelics, primarily psilocybin. And I had some major awakening, opening experiences on psilocybin, which I realized not everyone was having those particular experiences later on. I thought everyone was having these experiences taking these psychedelics, but not necessarily everyone was having the exact same experiences I was having. I started to, on psychedelics primarily, I started to perceive and see what I call energy or subtle energy and energy fields. I started having what I consider non-dual experiences. The dissolution of the self, the recognition of oneself as this sort of non-physical awareness presence, and also the breakdown of inside and outside and the separateness of things. So I was having these profound interconnected unity experiences. I was also having what I consider Kundalini experiences too, where I would feel a tremendous amount of energy shooting up my system and opening my channels up. And when I would have that, I would enter into these really euphoric, blissful, and transcendent states of intense love, where I felt connected to everything and I felt love and compassion for all beings, which profoundly impacted me, obviously. And the crazy thing often was that even after I would come down, I wasn't really coming down. So afterwards, I would walk around and I'm like, wait, where's my body? Like, I could see it, but I can't feel it. And I'm like, I could feel everything in that person. Holy shit, that's uncomfortable, So I got really socially awkward for a while because every time I'd be talking to someone, I could almost feel and sense all the sensations in their bodies. And it was really disconcerting, actually. Around the same time, I was also taking these really interesting courses at UCSC around spirituality, eco-psychology, right? Connection between nature and human consciousness, things like that. And I was also doing a lot of yoga. I met my first yoga teacher, who was actually a student too, but he was very advanced. And he was doing kind of an interesting martial arts meets yoga meets new age spirituality type of thing. I started also doing healing work, studying massage, and because they had through the recreation program there at UCSC, they had like a holistic health program. So I was doing what we call process acupressure, which is using traditional acupressure as a way of freeing up the energy channels in the body and also releasing trauma. And so I was already feeling energy. So when I started taking those classes, I started learning these pressure points and how to feel the channels and meridians in the body. And then I started applying that in my yoga practice, and I was having these really profound openings and experiences. So all this stuff was happening kind of all at once when I entered college, and kind of set me up for my next 20 years, basically. I was also having these really interesting visions of a utopian future. And then I was hanging out with a lot of other hippies and spiritual people. And Santa Cruz was full of access to these types of practices, these types of ideas, and really unique community of humans, right? So that was, influencing me. All my Asian friends were like, "What the fuck are you doing? Who are you turning into?" They were drinking beer and smoking pot and chasing girls. And I was like celibate for 2 years, really high on psychedelics, going off the far end. They were kind of worried about me. And yeah, around that time, I started to form the vision of what I wanted to do for the rest of my life, in terms of like, oh, okay, this type of practice, this type of path is really transformative. And luckily, the academic context allowed me to start to do a lot of writing, right, in the courses I was taking, which started to help me form sort of a conceptual, framework for what I was experiencing and what I wanted to do with what I was experiencing and what I was realizing. It started to help me organize my ideas. Eventually, I had to decide a major. So sophomore year, I'm like, okay, I better figure this shit out. And I was thinking about it, mulling it over in my dorm room, and suddenly I was like, maybe I should do something like combine Eastern and Western medicine or something like that. And as I had that thought, I suddenly got an energy rush in my whole body, and I got like goosebumps, and I was like, whoa, that's weird. Like something's obviously speaking to me here. So I started to consider that possibility. And then around that time, I was like, okay, I can build my own major, because you can design your own major at UCSC at that time. But then I was so psychedelic, I wasn't grounded enough to like go through the process of making all that happen. And I talked to a couple of advisors, and they were like, I can't support you. So I was like, all right.
Can't help
and
you
then,
out.
Yeah, I was like, okay. And then around the time, I found that there was a major called community studies at that time. And again, UCSC back then was super crazy, because I also didn't have grades. I had narrative evaluations. I opted out of grades during that time. And they had this major called community studies that was about social change and social work. So the major would allow you to have your own focus of how you vision social change, and then do community sort of documentation of going into the community and applying your ideas and working for a social justice organization or a community organization and documenting it. So I was like, oh, cool, this works. And funny enough, one of the introductory courses to the major was Eastern and Western perspectives on medicine or health. Happened to be.
Oh, wow.
I'm like, okay. And so I joined the course. I started to organize my ideas, and I started to, kind of do more writing. And I was like, man, it'd be so cool to go to Hawaii or something, because I was like also wanting to take a vacation or go to Hawaii. I always wanted to go to Hawaii. I had an obsession with tropical places. And then I was in my yoga class, and there's this really hot Hawaiian girl in class that I met. And I started talking to her, and it turns out her parents work for health clinics and does social work in Hawaii. And then it turns out my teacher for the course had taken a sabbatical the year before, and she became my advisor for the major. And she had worked in Hawaii the previous year in these clinics. So it was a strange thing. And so then it all worked out. I got connected through her and her parents, and I got basically like what was it? What do you call it? I just got a placement to do my what's the word for it? I'm like blanking out right now. But
internship?
Yeah, it's kind of like interesting. So you take 6 months and you can go and work out in the community basically, and learn and document it as part of your major. So I decided to go to Hawaii.
Wow, that's
And
awesome.
I went away for 6 months through this very synchronistic, serendipitous connection. Ended up there, I met an amazing, mind-blowing yoga teacher who was teaching for free outside in the park, in Kapolani Park in Waikiki, for 6 months. And he never charged anyone. I still paid him money, and he had studied yoga in India for years, going back and forth. He was an Indian man too, but born in the U.S. And he was teaching this crazy, super intense, like sadhu yoga, right, with mudras and bandhas. And as soon as I started taking his classes, I started having psychedelic flashbacks, because the techniques would push energy into the central channel, right, and basically induce Kundalini experiences. So my system was already pretty open from doing yoga and doing psychedelics. I was starting having these really transcendental, again, psychedelic experiences in the yoga practice. Around the same time, I also was working in the clinic, and I had kind of an emotional breakdown because I was so sensitive. I was in these projects, and I was seeing all these kids and these families that were like immigrant families that were in poverty and in these housing projects. And I had an emotional breakdown. My advisor and sent me to go see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist wanted to put me on meds 3 minutes into our conversation. I gave him the finger. I said, "Fuck you." Because I already at that point, I was very disenchanted with Western medicine and the way they were approaching mental health. And I was like, this is wrong. So I just walked out of there and never went back. And then around that time, I met these Korean Taoists that were basically kind of a cult, right? But they were, again, I just saw the sign called Yoga Tai Chi or something. I was like, yoga and Tai Chi, that's interesting. No one mixes that. So I walked into the clinic and space, and they were teaching this interesting hybrid of Taoist practices, kind of yogic practices, and New Age concepts. So I looked at I turned around when I walked in, I looked at the bookshelf, and they had all the books I had just read. Conversations with God, Barbara Ann Brennan's Hands of Light, these books that were very influential to me at that time. And I was like, this is an interesting group. And so I started training with them. And so when I got kicked out, I left the placement with the health clinic, right? And again, the health clinic there, the reason why I went there was they were technically combining Eastern Western medicine, and they had acupuncture in the clinic combined with Western psychiatry and also, with social workers. But after 2 months, I left, and then I kind of interned I was like, fuck it, I'm gonna just intern at this healing center, and they gave me their uniform. They started training me, basically in their style, which was an interesting, again, mixture of yoga and qigong and tai chi. And I was like, hey, you guys should mix yoga with this stuff. And I was kind of helping them with their system and also learning it. And they would also do personal development type of work too. And their master, Song Hong Lee, was this pretty well-known master in Korea, and he had a bunch of centers everywhere, all over the U.S. Later, it turns out these guys were embezzling money, and they were kind of like cutting people off from their families and like doing all kinds of crazy shit. And then all this controversy happened. And I even met people later on who were part of the organization that also, I guess, were sexually assaulted and all kinds. It was crazy, But at that time, at the same time, the teachings were amazing. Like what they were teaching and things they were putting together were really cutting edge. And it was very influential for me in my formative years in terms of learning a lot of these Taoist techniques. And they taught me how to root my chi into the dantian and ground myself, because I was really out there from the uses of psychedelics and too much New Age meditation and too much yoga and eating raw food diet. This is like 1997, 98. So I was eating dates and kale and shit, and like skinny as a bone, doing hella yoga and getting super high, right? And then so around the time I was doing a lot of writing for it's a crazy story, I know. I haven't told it in this much detail in any of the podcasts I've been in yet, so it's all over the place. But so then I was, working on my major stuff, which I had to document the whole experience and start to write, a lot of stuff down, right, to try to make sense of all the things I was experiencing. And then I find out I caught one day like some of the teachers reading my shit on the computer. They're like, you can use our computer. And they're reading through my notes. And I'm like, what are you guys fucking doing? And I'm like, what the hell? And I got mad at them. We had a whole conversation. And so I started printing out some of it, just to protect and have it. And I was like, I don't know what they're going to do. And then I think a couple weeks later, the center had a break-in and someone stole the hard drive and the laptop and all my notes were gone. And I was like, holy shit, this is crazy. So luckily I had printed out some of it and I had hard copies. So that was fine. But, and then eventually I started getting guidance of like, okay, I need to leave the center. This shit's crazy. Like, because they started to have these Korean headmasters, right, from Korea come, and they were checking me out. And they were, again, at that point, I think they were trying to pull me into the org to indoctrinate me and pull me into being one of the teachers. But funny enough, one of the headmasters that came from Korea saw me and kind of immediately kind of sensed something, because basically these guys were psychic. They were training in psychic skill sets too. They had a particular part of their yogic training, right? Taoist training that was around training psychic abilities, like seeing energy fields and all that kind of stuff. And they had like a martial arts component and things like that. It was pretty crazy. And this one guy looked at me. He's like, "No, this guy's not going to stay. He's going to leave you." And he kind of told the head master of the center. And sure enough, I got guidance and I was like, I need to go. So I kind of left them. That was a whole drama process. And, my term of 6 months was ending. So I came back to the States, went back to college. And so I went through the process of finishing off my college degree. And in the process of doing that, I had to write a thesis, right? Putting all this stuff together. So I started to formulate a theory around everything that I was learning and how it applied to social change, because that was my major. And my idea was like, okay, well, one of the reasons why our world's so messed up is due to the state of consciousness that we are in collectively, right? And through the courses I was taking, I was realizing the extent to which I would say corruption had, permeated our world, right? From the prison industrial complex. Because I was also hanging out with social justice guys, friends who were into that kind of stuff. I actually ended up doing a whole theater project combining social justice and theater. So I was learning a lot about that through them. So my thesis kind of involved breaking down the ways in which our system was corrupt, both the medical systems, the prison industrial complex, and how, corporations and capitalism, right? And it kind of went through the list and just kind of analyzed how our society was partly messed up because the consciousness that was behind what birthed all these systems in itself was corrupt. So we can try to change the institution, but if you want to get to the root, you have to address the consciousness or the state of mind, right? And the perspective or view that's informing these different institutions and making them operate. And again, at that time, I was coming from a very spiritual perspective. So I was primarily talking about how, let me step back. So there's this book I read by Fritjof Capra called The Turning Point. And in that book, he was talking about how Western perspectives, Western paradigm is primarily informed by Newtonian physics and Cartesian logic and things like that, right? So basically it's reductionism. Everything is separate, right? People are individuals. Things are not interconnected, right? And those kind of perspectives inform traditional Western view. So as a result, we can kind of compartmentalize things. We don't look at interconnections of things, right? And I kind of started to feel like that was the fundamental problem. And because what I was having in these psychedelic experiences and through my spiritual practices were these experiences of intense unity and transcendence and compassion and love for everything. And I noticed when I was coming from there, how I wanted to act, what I wanted to do, how I saw the world was so different. So I felt like if people, at the time, I was like, if people practice this stuff and have these similar experiences, it would fundamentally change them and change the way they would see the world, and what the kind of world we would birth from that place would be completely different, right? So I started to kind of write my thesis based on that. Sorry. So I want to take a break, check in with you guys. I'm talking a lot.
Oh, I'm loving this.
Oh no, this is great. I honestly, yeah, it is very cool to hear such a different story about it, or about your journey, And I just want to add in, as you continue along there, that I plan to not only talk to you today, but afterwards, because I never went down the psychedelic route, but I went down a different route, and we'll definitely have some different things to talk about for sure. And just for time's sake, I can't get into all those things right now. But yeah, please continue and just wrap up of, how you got to where you are today through all of those different experiences, and it's so, we always look at drugs as such a negative thing. And it's not negative if you're using it in a way towards, the best way to say it, towards spirituality. There's a purpose, there's a reason behind it, right? And even, we've talked about Western medicine on here a little bit, me and Nate. I even think to a degree, if we're using Western medicine for a purpose, then it's okay. But how we use Western medicine, that could be a whole episode on itself of how we use it, and it turns into a negative thing. So, I love how you've spun that and have put it into a good and healthy format in a way that, they are starting to do the experiments on psychedelics now. They are starting to do the microdosing. They are finding people with anxiety, using psychedelics to heal it and doing it in ways where it's little mini pills. And we will eventually be using that. And Western medicine is going to be it's going to be a very crazy thing we tried for many, many years. But yeah, I'm going to give it back to you because I do want to hear the rest of how you got to here today and the rest of the in-between right there.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, psychedelics was definitely formative in my process for sure, but definitely at a certain point, because I really do feel like I would encounter at times a presence on psychedelics. I would have conversations with, whether it was my higher self or the medicine itself or the spirit of the medicine. But at a certain point, I started getting the message of like, hey, dude, stop doing this stuff. You got the fucking message. Go do your work. And and I started having really bad trips around that time too. I was not having those really opening, expansive experiences I was having early on. So I had to kind of take a step back, and I pretty much haven't been really taking psychedelics for years now, for the most part, as part of my process after that initial phase. And I've also, I have to just keep the narrative balanced. And I also had some friends and people I knew back then that really lost their shit as a result of taking psychedelics and never came back fully. So I do want to kind of, keep the narrative and the conversation balanced in terms of it can be risky, because you are unwinding and unfolding your consciousness in a very intense and deep way, which luckily I came back from intact, but I do believe in facilitated and well curated experiences and with, done with purpose versus just purely recreational personally. I'm more of a believer in that these days, I find.
Yeah, I want to jump into that because I completely agree with you. And that's also what I mean by Western medicine is where we lack in the conscious mind and in the collective, what we truly lack is the balance. And why aren't there, doctors telling people how to use the psychedelics, right? So just like, your friends that had the bad experiences that kept doing it, that probably could have been prevented at some point if we did it in a healthier way. And there's no balance there, right? And I love that you talked about there. And I think a lot of people can relate to that, right? It's just that, even for me, part of my story is the fact that, I am an addict in recovery today. And part of my path was, abusing weed way too much, abusing my main choice of poison was food. I abused the shit out of food. And a completely different person today with, losing over 100 pounds through that experience of waking up and realizing, what am I doing? Right. And it takes a while for us to wake up of it. Wait, what am I doing? And I remember having kind of the awakening moment when it came to using weed recreationally. And it just got to a point where it's like, I need to stop this shit. Like, I'm just doing it a little too much, and there's not, I caught myself and, luckily too, great conversations with Nate out of it as well, realizing what am I actually using this for? What's the reason behind it? And I feel that we also do the same thing with medicine even just regular Western medicine. Why am I still taking this anxiety medicine if I've been taking it for over a year and I'm, back to square one, right? And we need to always look for the purpose, look for the reason behind it. And we don't go deep enough in those layers. So I love that that's part of your story that, hey, I did this, I went deep, but I had to stop. I had to come back out of it, because if we don't come back out of it, then we don't enjoy the experience of life, right? We don't experience that. We're not supposed to be using all those drugs every single second of the day. We're supposed to also be experiencing this movie, this illusion, this thing called life that is absolutely epic. And we don't need drugs constantly to be enjoying it. I completely love that you bring it back to that, and bringing it back to, the experience. I want to go back to something that you said too about learning how to ground yourself and learning to go through that, because I think that'd be very helpful to the audience. And I think that's very helpful for people. And the reason why I want to go back to that and it jumped out to me is I went through a similar circumstances with feeling different people's energy. And I found out along my journey that I'm very empathetic. I am an empath as well. And I got to this point. So once I lost weight, one thing that I haven't shared on this podcast that I think you'll be able to interject right into is when we do tend to be really big, subconsciously and emotionally, it's our conscious mind kind of freaking out that we're feeling all these energies. So we try to put on these layers, and this layer ends up being bigger skin. And when I did lose the weight, I got to this point where I was feeling everything. And it was like, what the hell is going on? And it's weird to say, but I could feel anger, sadness, everything that was going on around me. And luckily, and we're eventually going to bring her on this podcast, my amazing wife, who has dealt with anxiety, and she is way more empathetic than me. She is the true empath and can feel all sorts of different energy. And luckily, she helped me and taught me about grounding and energy work and how to balance it and use different techniques, right? And I would love for you to start talking about, kind of what a basic grounding looks like, and how, because I do believe this is a big reason why we're so out of whack, is that nobody knows this information, right? Not nobody, but not enough people know it.
Absolutely.
And it would help us balance things out so much. And when we are feeling overwhelmed, anxious, we're running around trying to take care of kids, our dogs, go to work. If we just stopped, grounded ourselves, and things just end up being way more balanced, right? So I would love for you to interject on that and talk about that.
For sure. So I'll just wrap up the whole origin story process real quick, and then I'll get to that because it'll be relevant. So then after I got out of college, I took a little break. I was smoking a lot of pot. I was doing a lot of yoga. I started teaching yoga. I joined kind of like a dance community. I danced a lot, which is very cathartic for me. And being in community was also very healing for me at that time, because I found sort of my people for a while there. And then fast forward, I kept training, kept studying on my own. I learned a lot through teaching. Like, a lot of stuff would come through me just spontaneously as I was teaching. Because there was a component I learned from going into a lot of psychedelic experiences and trance experiences where I would go into altered states. And my access to those states were really opening up over time. I found an amazing sort of qigong, like Taoist master, a Western guy who studied in Monterey. So I studied with him for 2.5 years with a bunch of students, learned Taoist magic, mysticism, medical qigong, and some tai chi and baguazhang, some martial arts, the energetics of those practices. After that, I joined a school called Luminous Body, which turned into Luminous Awareness Institute, which I still teach at. And it's sort of a healing school that focuses on developmental trauma and non-dual meditation and energy healing. And so around that time, all my toolkits started to come together, and just teaching on a regular basis, I started to synthesize my knowledge base more and more, and think about it in context of like, what's practical? What do we need now? What's helpful? And I realized more and more, a lot of the skills that I learned were very helpful in nervous system regulation, right? Because a lot of one way to talk about it is energy. Another way to, I think, talk about some of the stuff we're talking about is nervous system regulation, right? So, for example, your experience then of like having an overwhelming experience of your environment, you had a highly sensitive nervous system that your system just didn't know how to handle. So you use food as a way to buffer that, right? Where in which when you learned the skills and ability to manage that overload of information in your nervous system and regulate your nervous system, you didn't have to rely on the food anymore. Right? So those of us who are empathic and have a high sensitivity in the nervous system, or a lot of us who've had trauma, childhood trauma, right? Because what we're finding, and I can corroborate this through my experience of working with people for years, like the addiction comes from childhood trauma very often. It comes from this inability to process life, inability to process sensory data and information in our nervous system properly. And we get overloaded at a certain point because we feel disconnected, or we didn't get the co-regulation we needed in the interaction with our primary caregivers, right? And we have an intense experience of dysregulation somehow, right? Maybe it was being abandoned and neglected too early, didn't get enough touch, not receiving enough love and affection. It could be anything, right? Or simply the parent was just emotionally shut down. So they can feel an emotional connection to the parents, which is traumatic, because human beings are social animals and social beings. So we need human contact, we need interaction, and especially in the formative years, the interaction we have with our primary caregivers sets the tone for how we regulate our nervous systems, right? And how we deal with stress, right? Meaning like we regulate with the parent, either through affection and care, right? And we get our needs met, which regulates our nervous system too, right? Or we learn through templating. We watch how the parents regulate stress and deal with stress, and we take that ability on. And a lot of us took really sort of not very helpful, right, coping mechanisms on from our parents, right? Like ignoring our feelings, or using some sort of avoidance technique or compensation technique, right? So for a lot of people, they're caught up in the compensation approach, right? Instead of being able to process the stress properly, healthily, and move it through the system and rebalance and regulate the system, they try to avoid it and buffer it in some way. And these are what we call compensation approaches, right? Versus full nervous system regulation approaches. The cool thing about practices like qigong, somatic therapies, yoga, meditation, breath work is that we can start to build an awareness of our own body minds, right? Get in touch with what's going on. And then ideally we're working with a teacher that can give us different skills and tools that we can build in the system that help us then develop the capacity to adapt and digest and metabolize the stress. And also we can learn how to regulate the nervous system, bring it back down into a calm and easeful state. And when we could do that, we don't have to rely on the compensation. Right?
Well said. I love that. And I love the whole story and how you wrapped up the origin story. And, a couple things I'm going to jump around for a second too, because I think it'll be good for going back to a couple different things. Because I love how you bring up the anime and how you saw that as a kid, because it's still a spiritual connection. And why I love bringing that up, to bring it back to Western culture and how I grew up. The spiritual thing for me was growing up through comic books and superheroes and seeing these big, strong people, but also be human. One of my favorite superheroes is Spider-Man, because he was a kid. He had to deal with losing his uncle. He had to deal with regular kid things and then go out and fight crime, right? So he had to deal with human nature and how to go past that. And the reason why I bring that up too, to bring it back to the grounding, I love how you talked about the nervous system, because we don't understand how these things work. And for my experience and what it was like through me, as I'm explaining it to my wife, as I'm going through it, what are you feeling? And the only way I knew how to relate to her is being like, because we're big, she's a big Disney nerd and I'm a big comic book nerd. So it all works out, right? And awesome. The only way I could describe to her about it is saying, remember when we watched Superman and he was a kid and he's seeing X-ray vision for the first time and he's like freaking out? That's literally how I felt. I felt like I was just like seeing all these things and feeling all these things and didn't know where to put them and don't know what to do with it. And I think back of how we're raised that we just don't know anything about this, right? So we don't know what's going on. So we automatically go into panic. So when we go into panic, what are we going to do? We're going to go to doctors. Oh, I don't know what to do. And they're going to give you a pill. They're going to suppress it. We're not going to fix it, right? And I think what's interesting too, and what makes sense, is how you talk about how we avoid it. But it's not even just how we avoid it. We're not taught how to do it, and how we're taught in Western society, especially as men growing up. You know, you got to cut on your leg, throw some dirt on it, get back on the field, right? suck it up. It's no big deal. Go about your day, go about a life. You got to man up, right? And where I see this society going and this culture going is not, it is not feminine to figure out what's going on. It is more masculine to figure out and fix what's going on with you than anything else. We're just not taught how to do it. And so the first reaction right away is, oh, that's weird. Oh, that's not, you just need to toughen it up. You just need to do this. Right. So, the way you're talking about that and how you describe it, that's exactly what I think our society is going towards. Right. And you are definitely ahead of the curve, and your knowledge is amazing from what I've heard and how it's described. So I appreciate that very much. And the addiction side of it too, I truly believe, from going through what I've gone through, I truly believe that if people that are addicts are going through that, if they knew this side of them, if they knew these capabilities, they would be able to heal. They would be able to heal.
That's the idea.
Yeah. And with that being said, one of the questions I think would be great to bring back to you: what does healing truly mean to you? And how do you incorporate that in everything that you're doing?
That's a really deep question. It means so many things to me. Because I think one is the reclamation of our body mind, right? In terms of like actually going back and like what are we missing really in our development? And I tend to frame it in that context more now, because that's kind of what I focus on in the one-on-one work I'm doing with people, which is the attachment and developmental wounding. So when I track, this is something I discovered through working with my body, and I like to bring it all back to the body as well as what we call the subtle body or energy body, because the body stores the memory of what we go through, and it also holds the habituations and the patterns too, right? In terms of including how we perceive something or how we feel around something and how we respond to something is all sort of subconscious, right? It's very much built in. So I really look at healing as, number one, becoming more connected to what's happening, right? Becoming more aware of what's going on, which I think is often what happens with people who practice yoga or meditation. They start to get in touch, right? Because often in our culture, we're not taught how to be with our experience or examine it. We're taught to, absorb information and regurgitate it. That's education, right? Versus deep self-reflection and awareness. And I think what's really unique and beautiful about the spreading of meditation, yoga, and qigong and things like that, body practices and somatics and therapy, is that there's more and more emphasis on self-reflection in a very real, grounded way. And the foundations of Orthodox Buddhist practice even too, right, is founded upon meditation and mindfulness, which means you take your attention, you learn how to stabilize it on a single object so it's not all over the place, and then you start to direct it towards the self, right? The experience of me, mine, I, the body, the mind, and you start to examine it. In which, if you don't have any concentration, you can't examine because you get distracted. So those things go hand in hand. So when you have some training of the body mind, right? And it could even be body training. You can start with training the body to be still, like in yoga, which again is actually teaching you how to be with the body, pay attention to it, and also to regulate your nervous system so you can stay in a position for a certain duration of time. And also the stretching and the breathing starts to release the tension from the system, which then gives you more capacity to stay calm and be able to stay there, right? So all these skill sets are being taught. And I think healing in the first stages is kind of learning that you can regulate the body and mind through the posture, the breath, and through mental concentration, right? And that's the foundation. And then from there, we become aware of ourselves. And then from there, we're looking at, okay, where are we experiencing pain, imbalance, and suffering, and examining that. And then really examining the deeper layers and roots of what contributes to that, right? And we might find that, okay, often we will examine habits, like all these habits that I have in my life are creating problems, right? And you kind of from there go deeper. What's behind the habits? Well, it's because I feel a certain way. I have certain thoughts that I feel compelled to do this. Oh, interesting. Where does that compulsion come from? And you keep going deeper. And often you end up in these deeper, very embodied physical sensations and feelings that we're either of trying to avoid or contend with or deal with in some way that is compelling us. So when you get into whether it's a person who's addicted to drugs or food or being a workaholic, and you bring them back to the experience of the body, and you start to ask the question of like, what, when you're compelled to do these things, what's actually happening inside the body in those moments, right? And you examine it, you often find that there's some sort of agitation, some sort of discomfort that they're experiencing that they're trying to remedy through taking those actions. And that's the compensation, is to take those actions. But if you can teach and facilitate for people a process of actually examining the discomfort and teach them how to navigate that discomfort internally in a way that resolves it instead of taking the action, right? Then they can learn how to move through and metabolize that discomfort, get to what's underneath it, which often is pain, grief, resentment, right? Things like that. Yeah. And you can teach them how to process that, digest that. Then the compulsion starts to actually not be necessary, right? We don't have to engage in those acts to get relief. Often, a lot of things that we're doing in terms of unhealthy habits are compelled by deeper pain and a desire to avoid that pain. So to me, healing is the process of understanding, recognizing that, and teaching people how to work with that in their system and developing that capacity and skill in their body and nervous system, right? Which then I think turns into maturation. And it's a form of maturing the body and mind in its development and completing a cycle of natural development. It's not a fixing process so much to me at this point. I don't conceptualize it as that. It's not like adding something you're really missing. It's more of the process of recognizing what was not provided for you to develop fully into who you naturally are. And often what you discover as people go through this process of being able to reclaim their body mind and take full ownership of their capacity is that who they are naturally actually starts to flourish and show up, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I see the arc of the healing process.
Oh, I like how they speak about bringing it back to the body, so often. And it's the number one relationship in our life, and it's the only relationship that we're like in constant contact with for our entire life. Mm-hmm. You really taught me a lot about tuning into my own experience just simply by feeling the body. And we had some really powerful sessions together, but one that has always stuck with me was that we probably spoke for like 20% of the session, maybe. And, it was all silent and we were looking at each other, and you were just having me, to be in a relationship with somebody else while being as aware as I possibly could of my own body. And that kind of got the ball rolling for me. Like, you talk about synchronicities as you were talking about. That after that, all these different teachers were kind of like bringing this to me, and then I started to practice it a lot more and more and more. And I think that I was kind of having my first experiences with like a non-dual reality, and it was kind of like, I'm in a relationship, if you want to kind of like heal or settle down some problem, the problem or issue that's happening, it's like, well, first, the maybe just feel what's going on inside of my body, because maybe my natural empathy is picking up on something that they're feeling too. And then maybe if I and something else you said that really stuck with me too always is like, I give them the love that they never received. And obviously doing that with somebody else, but with yourself too, and those parts that come up with you that are like really uncomfortable, and you want to get it away, or you want to avoid it. that give that part of you the love that it never received. And like, in just the working on yourself and your own body, it can do a lot obviously for you, but also for the other person too.
Mm-hmm.
And so I love to hear you talk about just like, like force or control, and then like, allowing and flow, that because you definitely, over the past like year and a half of me taking your classes and working with you, have showed me like the the art of doing less and the power of doing nothing. Like, nothing but allow, nothing but feel, and kind of like, the power and the alchemy of acceptance. So I the, the, the want to ask you, like, in terms, of the healing process, or even just like, as we try and grow and get things done in the world, like, where is the place for like force, and where is the place for like more of like flow and allowing?
That's such a great question. Yeah. Um, I would say from a cultural perspective, right? We live in a culture that really, you can say, is very yang, right? Masculine, forceful, right? Force is worshipped in our culture. It's reified in so many ways. It's reinforced, right? Just like Ben, when you're talking about, the masculine, as a man, you're supposed to be like hard and strong and like, just like your wounds keep going type of thing. So it's very much what we're taught and how we're encouraged to engage with things. But often in that process, we miss a lot, right? Because we're trying to push through things. And so in the flip side, when we talk about the yin or the receptive, it's interesting because in our culture, we don't, other than like in a therapist's office, we don't have a practice of deeply listening or slowing down, right? And an interesting thing with COVID right now is a lot of people are being forced to slow down, or at least given the opportunity to do so or listen more, right? And when we do that, we become aware that there's a tremendous amount happening all around us and inside of us. And so what I found the importance of flow in my practice over the years is that when I was kind of, when you start to pay attention, you notice the effects of these things. When you're forcing constantly, I notice my body gets tight. I get stressed out. I get really in my head, and it just becomes like this, this very stressful downward spiral that happens in my whole body nervous system. And then early on, as I was working closely with my body, the body is very intelligent, isn't it? Right? It's such a unique instrument, and it's something we have to work with, not just dominate and control. And I think this is the same thing with nature. There's natural law is always operating in so many different ways. You can get with the program, or you can try to control it and fight it. And this whole attitude of control and domination and colonization is a very Western, I think, modern Western kind of paradigm, right? That kind of, again, it's a consciousness that's behind a lot of what we do. And I think my theory is that that's motivated a tremendous amount through trauma. I think Western culture is the culture of trauma, right? It's the history of trauma. It's the manifestation of trauma. So when you have people who have gone through intergenerationally, right, trauma, and that's being passed down over and over and over, we take this approach of using force and control as a way to try to subjugate life, right? Because control comes from the belief that the universe, life, nature is not to be trusted. Thus, we have to exercise force and control as a way to subjugate reality, to bend it to our will, so we can have the experience we want. Does that make sense? So it comes from a very particular belief and consciousness, an embodied experience. And this makes sense because I think people who have been betrayed, who've been traumatized, right? And this is not a judgment on them. It's just like the way it is, right? And a lot of our parents or, parents went through a lot of trauma. Like my dad was in the concentration camps. He got everything taken from him and he had to rebuild his life. When I look back and I'm doing my healing work, I remember him. He died when I was 10, and I didn't know him that much, but I remember how he felt. And having gone through all the experiences in healing that I've gone through and worked with so many people, and I look back now and I feel him, I could feel his trauma. I could feel his sadness, his pain, how shut down he was, how much he was holding inside his body, right? And so different people deal with trauma in different ways. But when you have trauma like that, I think a lot of us then build a distrust of life, right? We start to, because I think trauma affects not just the body, but also the perspective and the view, right? So people become not safe, right? The world looks unhospitable. Does that make sense? And then so from there comes the impulse to compensate for that by pushing and forcing. And interestingly enough, at some point, if you're blessed enough to have some sort of opening experience, uh, like some of us have had, we start to realize, oh, actually, when I open up and relax and just pay attention and become present with myself in a loving way, the pain actually resolves itself. Right? Just like a plant, like a weed grows on its own without me watering it or doing anything, healing is actually a very natural process in the body mind that's often being impeded by the very act of compensation, which is ultimately a desire to help ourselves, but it becomes a way of sabotaging ourselves, unfortunately. So at some point we have to course correct. And if we can just then come into this more receptive space to listen and to feel and pay attention and stop. And sometimes we need guidance to do that, or support to do that, or someone else to show us or hold the safe space to do that. But when we can get that transmission, this can happen in a yoga class, this can happen in a podcast, listening to a podcast, right? Guided meditation, then it can create this space, a safe space, right? And there's a transmission that's happening. Does that make sense? Because human beings are inherently and intrinsically empathic, and we're psychic, actually. We all are psychic and empathic. We are interdependent, interconnected beings, whether we know it or not. So when you are in the presence, and this is something that beautiful you said, Nate, like of how you feel like your healing work or people's healing work impacts other people. And it's so true, because as we individually begin to heal, we sort of hold a template and an example of it in an embodied way in the body. And so like when I hear, Nate, you talk, or guided meditation, or Ben, even you too, like when I hear you talk, there's a transmission there. I feel something. Like I feel your whole life experience. I feel who you are. I feel your love and your care and your passion. And that has an effect on me on a subconscious level, right? So when you have someone who's slowed down and who's done some healing, leading a class or leading a meditation or holding a podcast, and you get to kind of be in their field, you get to almost get a transmission of that consciousness. And there's a teaching that happens, and the body and mind is so intelligent, it picks up on these things. And so, for example, in a therapy session, when you sit with a healer or a therapist or a coach who's done a lot of internal work, there's an inherent knowing about the healing process, and healing wisdom and understanding and trust in the body, in the healing process that they're holding in the body, that is being transmitted through the presence and through the empathic interdependent connection, right? So that time when I was sitting with you, all I was doing was dropping into my whole being and in my ease in my being and my trust in you and your body's process. And I just held that knowing. And in that, your system picked up on that and got permission, right? And felt safe. And it started to go through its natural organic process of digesting that information and reorganizing itself and releasing healing and trauma and pain in that space, and also getting an understanding inherently of like, of its own wisdom, right? That I could be calm and I could trust, and it's okay. And when we start to develop that sense of okayness in our being, that trust again, then we can start to feel safe and content in the moment. And when we start to live from there, it's a completely different experience. We don't feel compelled to control or force or push so much, because there's actually this deeper level of trust in life, in the body's process, in other humans, right? All that.
Yeah.
So what you're saying at the end there, to really kind of that tuned me into something that's very relevant for the whole world right now, because so much has gone online. And like, that really powerful transmission that you were just talking about between you and I mean, it happened over Zoom. And like, I know that obviously there are differences between doing things in person and doing things online. There are pros and cons of both.
Mm-hmm.
And like in this year, like, a lot of our work has been shifted, and your work I know has gone a lot online, maybe all online, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just kind of wondering, like, in that experience with like the like adapting, what you do, or the way you do it, like, so what you've learned about like our connection, between our interdependency and kind of like maybe what you've learned about yourself in order to like adapt to the way you do things after like stuff. I don't know how many years of doing it like in a similar way.
Oh, so you're asking about how I've adapted during COVID in a sense,
Yeah.
in some sense? Yeah. So yeah, this has been the hidden blessing for me for many reasons, but like, and again, I want to respect that COVID has been extremely difficult for so many people, and my heart goes out to everyone who's struggling right now.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate that I've had some blessings come through in this experience. One was taking my whole business online, which has been great for me because I'm a very free spirit person and I like to be able to travel, move around, and kind of be wherever I want to be. Like my dream life is to be wherever I want to be, do whatever what I want to do when I want to do it, type of thing. That's the kind of person I am. So like, as much as I loved it, driving over the hill to San Jose from Santa Cruz, Los Gatos, like 3-4 times a week was kind of rough for me. It was stressful, and so being able to do work with people one-on-one on Zoom and teach my classes on Zoom actually has been tremendously rewarding and also relaxing. and the most amazing thing that I realized is how effective a lot of the work can still be over Zoom. And what I've realized in that process is something I kind of knew, but I just confirmed it, is that we truly are non-local, non-dual beings. Consciousness is non-local, non-dual. What does that mean? That means consciousness, even though we may perceive at times to be confined in this particular time and space, does not only exist in that time and space. And as far as I understand, physics has already proven this. There's been scientific experiments that have been done. There's a book I read called The Field, I think. I forgot the author's name. But she goes into a lot of these physics experiments over the years that were done that, as far as I know, has proven that the non-local nature of consciousness and energy and phenomena. Meaning, like, they did a lot of tests where like someone was 100 miles away, had a thought, another person picked up on it, right? And could or like they had slot machines that people were influencing it, not just non-locally, but across time and space as well. And they would have statistical irregularities to the positive that were statistically impossible, right? And so when I do Zoom, even though like right now, for example, right, we're on Zoom, technically you're not here in this space at all. There's some part of us on a consciousness level that we can pick up on each other, sense each other, and impact each other. And because so much of the work that I do is about presence and feeling and contact and influence and listening, even without the person being there, I noticed that I could pick up on what they were going through accurately, and that they could also feel me. Right. And I feel like that's even happening here. Like earlier when you were leading your meditation and when you guys talk, I could feel you. And you guys can probably feel me to some extent. There's this interaction happening. If there's some tether, like on a level of awareness, sound, the voice, even the facial expressions, there's so much we're picking up on and interacting, right? And influencing each other through. So I think there's a tremendous amount of healing and positive work that you can still do over technology, especially if you become open to and recognize the sort of non-dual, non-local quantum level of consciousness. And this is how distance healing works too, right? Like this is kind of a crazy story, but years ago when I was taking too many psychedelics, okay, this is going to get really woo. We're getting really woo. We're going to woo land, hardcore. But so I was taking too many psychedelics. I was starting to have really weird symptoms. And one day I woke up, I couldn't move. I literally couldn't move. Like I just felt drained and I tried to move my body and I was like, something's wrong. So I called my aunt who I knew was a psychic healer. So, and then she's like, okay, go lie down. I'll call you when I'm done. I lie down. I feel something come over me. And then about 20, 30 minutes in, I feel like something leaves and clears out. And I open my eyes and the phone rang. And I talked to my aunt. She's like, yeah, you had some stuff on you. Right. Basically, according to her, I had some entities attached to me and this is something I found out later too from talking to other teachers and shamans, is that when you take psychedelics, your auric field or your field kind of rips open. And that's why you can have these non-dual experiences and things like that. But you could also become susceptible to entities and energies and parasites and things like that. And after that, I encountered a bunch of those things. And luckily these days, I don't have to deal with them so much anymore for some reason. And I'm not having those experiences anymore. But she worked on me from a distance and I felt it. And I was totally fine after that. So that was my first introduction to distance healing. and that we can still be impacting each other on some level through consciousness and presence, even though physically we might not be in the same space. So
that's amazing, and I completely buy into all of that. And I think, as terrible as this has been for so many, and my heart goes out to anyone that's dealing with this pandemic on a closer way than I have. We are learning a lot about ourselves through this, and I think that those awakenings that we can be doing, we can be connecting on some level. We are connected on some level more than we think, and I think too that as far as how we're going to end up getting through this, I think the world's definitely going to be changing. That's my belief. I think that we're not going to be so crowded together and crammed together. There's a difference of, I think people also need to be alone as much as they're together with people, right? And there's something to that, because we're picking up on all these fields. We're picking up on all these auras, and we don't even know it. So what ends up coming out of this, I think this is great, because I would love to hear your perspective. Me and Nate have talked about this before, and what my belief is I do believe we're getting ready to step into a new golden age. And I got that feeling too, as soon as you actually talked about your psychedelic experience when you're younger, of you envisioning a utopia. Not sure if that, has anything to do with this, but I have a feeling it does. I do believe we're all here today talking about it, and that we're bringing this podcast to the light to have people understand there are folks like you out there. There are many healers out there, and we're continuing to wake up the collective by talking about it. And that is a big step in stepping into the golden age. So I'd love to hear your perspective of, where we're at now to where you think things are going. And I think that's a great way to wrap everything up as well.
wow, that's a massive question too. You guys have these really big, deep questions. I'm like, oh my god. Where are we at now? Wow. I mean, yeah, man. I would say, okay, first of all, I would say I was very optimistic when I was really young, in my early 20s, because I saw those visions of what was possible, and I was like, it's gonna happen, it's happening, because I actually saw a lot of consciousness opening up around me at that time too, because psychedelics were being used a lot in my environment, and I was around all these hippies and people who had these really visionary sort of perspectives on life, and it was very inspiring. And then as life progressed, and I got out of college, things got more grim, for a while. I was like, this is not happening at the rate that I thought it was happening, And at the same time, so it's this interesting dichotomy of feeling like, man, the world's still really kind of fucked up, and things are really opening up, right? And it's really a perspective thing, right? It depends on what you're looking at and paying attention to. Because now, 20 years later, when I look back, I'm like, holy shit, all the stuff that I thought was fringe, that no one was really talking about, is mainstream now. Yoga, right. Meditation, therapy, psychedelics, consciousness work, right? All this stuff is becoming mainstream. There's a lot of people talking about it. There's people like you guys who are doing these podcasts. This is so much more available now. So I think it's very possible we're on that tipping point where things could head in an amazingly positive direction, because of the resources that we have at our disposal at this point available to us. I think we still need to be doing a lot of work though too, and this is where the force piece, you still have to apply yourself, and you can't just lay around. There's a point where you want to be in the flow and not try to over control everything, but we still need to set an intention of what we want to do together collectively on this planet and put our work in. So for example, we have a new administration going into place politically, right, in this country. We need to hold them accountable. We need to be engaged somehow and try to exert some positive influence on that level, right? In terms of who's going to be in the cabinet, what kind of policies are going to be enacted. We need to be active around that. We need to be active around doing inner work, like you beautifully said, Ben. I think people need to be spending more time on their own, doing self-reflection and working on their stuff, healing their inner issues, and traumas. We need to reorganize our institutions, right, and the way they're run. So I think there's a lot of momentum for change right now, which is super exciting. I'm inspired by it. I think there's a lot of potential here. And there's also potential to leverage a lot of difficulties we're going through right now if we help each other. So I really think that things like this that you guys are doing, where you're stepping out of your comfort zone and walking into your passion, taking risks and doing positive shit, is super important right now, to make sure we tip the scales in the right direction. So I don't think the end result is decided yet, but there's a lot of cool things happening. There's a lot of positive things happening, and we need to keep putting in the work.
Yeah, and I really like what you say there about how we need to keep, keep on doing and applying ourselves. And like, even though maybe the person who is elected president, is the one who you really, 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 really wanted to be president, that nothing has been decided yet in terms of like, long-term or real change. So it's like, yeah, all these things are happening and unfolding, but let's kind of organize our inner institutions, and then hopefully that, influences the outer institutions. Okay, cool. We lost Ben. That he might come back.
I mean, I'm kind of curious too, like, what's your sense of that?
What?
I mean, what do you think is happening? How do you see what's going on right now? What do you think we need to do? I'm kind of curious to hear your guys' opinion on that too.
Well, are we doing okay on time for you?
Oh, maybe we need to go. Yeah, I mean, I think I got a text. I don't think she wants to meet today. So I'm going to try to, yeah. So I think I'm good on time, personally.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So personally, I think what's happening is that we're all being, like, the whole world collectively, is being challenged. I think, it's safe to say that maybe every person on the planet was challenged to some degree, because of this pandemic. And what I really learned this year, and what I've really opened up to, is actually that the only way to grow and develop is by being challenged. And like, a lot of people, are being challenged in a way that might feel totally overwhelming, and they might be really, really struggling and just feel like they're going down, down, down. And then other people might feel like that they're getting like all this energy and they're gaining all these resources, and they're really, really stepping up. And then like, probably like a lot are in a mixed bag. But, I think all in all, in order for there to be like really, really positive change out of a place that's been kind of like, really, really dishonest for a long time in terms of like, what's really, I've been running the show, so to speak, and like the other countries and the politics. If there is going to be the really positive and long lasting change, there's got to be a point where it's like everything kind of falls apart. And like, that we've been kind of like seeing that right now. And so like, I don't see this as like a bad thing, even though, it is really painful and it is really difficult. I actually see it as like, this is like what is necessary in order for there to be, that'd be possible for there to be a new foundation, because if we were trying to change on top of change on top of the foundation that was here, then we're on like a very unstable foundation. So it's like, we got to tear it down, we got to demolish it, really get down to the roots and like, set a foundation. And then from there, now let's go up. And it might seem like we're at nothing at some point, but then like, with time, I think that it'll be, really something special and stable.
Yeah. Beautiful. Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I loved everything that you said there too, Mark, and Nate. I appreciate everything you're saying. We've actually, Nate and I have talked about this quite a bit as this has gotten going. And, from the moment it happened, I honestly intuitively just had feelings of, okay, it's not happening right now. It's not happening today, but we're getting ready to actually step into the golden age. By the time I am old, still sharing on this podcast with Nate, we will talk about past episodes. We will talk about the past episodes of COVID. That's awesome. And how we talked about the golden age then, right? It may be next year. It may be in 10 years from now. But I thought you brought up a really good point in the fact that, as you're going through everything and you're seeing this happen and that now you're seeing it being mainstream, right? There's a purpose behind that. And we think that if we're stepping in at a golden age, how we're conditioned is everything happens in years, right? Everything happens in 6 months, a month. It's quick, right? But what if it's not quick? What if it's supposed to happen and there's a flow and there's momentum and now we're at momentum, and I really do think we're at that tipping point. But here's the thing too that maybe people won't like, and the date is today, November 18th. 2020. What I will say is we are not out of the woods. It is gonna get worse before it gets better. There is gonna be some other crazy shit that does happen. I completely do feel that in my bones, and something is brewing. Now, that isn't anything to be scared about. That's something to embrace, because we have to go down to the core of breaking down the system, breaking down what didn't work in order to replace it. In order to show people, okay, this really isn't working. What else are we going to do? And we can't continue to depend on one administration to fix everything. We can't continuously depend on a government to fix everything. We need to go back to the art of depending on one another, and we need to go back to those roots. And that's another thing too of, why we started this podcast. And also I was talking with another friend the other day. We've lost the art of just talking with one another and listening. That has become a lost art. And we are finding that soul again. We are finding that rhythm again. People are actually realizing we could talk to anyone at any point in day right now. And this has been going on. The internet is not a new thing, right? But right now, today, if I wanted to take a class in France, I could do it. It's available. I could go anywhere in the world. And we are, for the first time ever, you want to look up biblical prophecies and this and that and what's going to happen. We are literally all connected. We are all connected. We are realizing we're all one. And it's going to be a beautiful experience when it's all said and done. And the climax of the movie always gets a little crazy. And, the Avengers didn't just beat Thanos. They had to realize every little thing and go back in time and fix this and fix that. And then they had this beautiful ending, right? But even through all the beautiful endings, we still lost Tony Stark and we still lost Iron Man. So at some point, there's some casualties along the way, but it all really just ends up working out.
Dude, I love your Avengers reference to wrap that up. That's awesome. That was great. Well, good storytelling there, both of you, man. Jesus, that's awesome.
Man, I do. No, go ahead.
Well, it's just I wanted to add one last piece as part of this narrative, which is at a certain point when I was realizing things weren't changing at the pace that I wanted it to, I got pretty depressed. And then one of the ways I came to terms with it was and some of it will help me was my spiritual kind of perspectives and beliefs around multiple lifetimes, and also an awareness of my ancestors. Our ancestors worked so fucking hard to get us here, generations and generations. And I'm just, just humbleness. I'm just a little piece in the cog, right? Of this whole movement towards healing and awakening and a better future for all of us. So I just to humble myself and be I might not be able to even see the fruits of my work and my vision, but it doesn't mean I'm not going to give it my all in this particular life to do whatever I can to help with that. And it's perhaps that these other beings, 100 years from now may reap the benefits of it. And that's great. And that's okay. And when I kind of framed my work in that perspective, it just kind of created a little bit more ease. So I wasn't so stressed out too, or depressed, and being it's okay. This is contributing to a larger process. Perhaps reincarnation is true. It is not, but if it is, that makes sense. And that's kind of a helpful perspective, just to step back and be hey, we're part of this larger continuum of change, and positivity in the world. And I'm at peace with, and I'm okay with making my contribution in this life, even if it doesn't show up 100% in the way I want it to in terms of the end results in this life. And to me, that brought me a lot of peace. So I just wanted to share that.
Yeah. I love that. And I resonate with that. And, when you do have time and when the audience has time too, I've had a journey of past lives that have put me on that on that point of realizing that every single life is precious. There's a reason for it. And, it doesn't matter what life it is, it serves a purpose and it's what you make out of it. And, that's one big reason why I'm here today, sharing the experiences of what I've gone through today, right now, right? But also what I've gone through in the past, and take it for what you want. I am here to tell the story of that. And Nate is here to be with me and tell his story and share that experience as well. And we're going to continue to bring on amazing, cool people like you to share that experience along the way, because we honestly all have a story. I don't care who you are. Every single person has a story. Somebody, your grandparents came over here from another country. Your dad worked his ass off for his entire life in order for you to go to school. Somebody has a story to share. Somebody has experience. And we have all got wrapped up into, oh, what's this movie telling us? Oh, what's the latest trend? But we all are the movie. We're all living it. We all have a story, and we need to continue to share and grow that. So before we continuously keep going and going and going on this, I just want to say, Mark, thank you for coming on today. We definitely plan on bringing you back many, many times and talking about many, many different things. And I think this is a good point to wrap up. And I know Nate and I would love and are honored if you would like to lead us in a meditation on the way out, of just a quick little 5-minute breathing meditation, whatever floats your boat.
Sure, I can freestyle something. All right, so just get your body comfortable. And you can even be seated or standing. If you are sitting, it's nice to lengthen the spine so it allows you to be awake and alert. But if you're feeling kind of stressed out and relaxation is important, you can soften the posture. Even if your spine is upright and you're quite awake and alert, try to also relax the body simultaneously and let the hips and shoulders melt down towards the ground. And see if you can now feel the whole body at once. Can you feel and sense your whole body? Next, without controlling, just notice the breath. And imagine creating relaxation, softness, and room around the breath so the breath can breathe itself more freely. And if you want to apply some effort or control here, just apply it to the exhale. Help the exhale out. So right at the end of your exhale, you can draw the abdomen in or lightly draw the ribs in just to push a little extra air out. And allow your inhale to be passive and at ease. Try that a couple more times where you help your exhale out so the body is supported in the process of letting go of tension. And then after you take a couple breaths to soften the body, go back to the experience of the whole body again if you like. Just allow everything to again soften and melt a bit more. Right. See what level of tension, where you can release tension without too much effort, just by noticing and softening and allowing. Now, can you, from there, feel that your body is aware? Right? Your body is intelligent, alive, and awake and aware. And that awareness translates to eyesight, taste, smell, hearing, and sensation and feeling. Recognize and just abide in the sentience of your body. And just allow yourself to feel what's there without trying to change it or fight it or fix it. Without trying to make sense of it even. Just allow yourself to feel what's there and be with what's there. And if you get distracted by your mind, notice that and see if you can come back to just sensing, feeling, and resting in that. All right, it's a little taste. And just rub your palms together. If you want, just give yourself a little rub on the face. Just gently massage the face. Rub your scalp. The back of your head. Give your neck a little squeeze. And then overlap the palms over the chest. Rub the heart down. Take a deep breath into the chest. Exhale through the mouth. Good. Rub the belly down. Circles. Take a deep breath into the belly. Exhale through the mouth. Good. Slide the hands to the lower back. Just give your lower back a little rub. Deep breath in. See if you can breathe into that lower spine. And a long exhale. All right. Cool. Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me on your show. That was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Thanks so much, Mark.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thank you. And, I'll end with this. It's funny. I realized as we started the episode, normally I talk about our little tagline, which is, me and Nate are here to share our experiences because life is a journey. We all need to have a little bit more fun. And as you're meditating there, as we've talked today, I think the message today is you all are here to share your experiences because life is a journey, and don't forget it. And go out today and feel the flow, feel the energy. If it's a car passing you by, that's a big, big, big thing of energy, right? But maybe you need to just walk a little further and go off and go by yourself and feel the energy and enjoy the experience. And part of that experience is helping yourself, helping a stranger, helping a loved one, and enjoying every little beautiful moment. So thanks for joining everyone today, and have a lot of fun. Sending you lots of peace and lots of love.